So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the fourth and last faculty reading of the 34th residency of Lesley University's Master of Fine Arts program. On Wednesday night at 7, with readings by our graduating students. Our reader tonight is faculty member in the Writing for Young People specialization, Jason Reynolds, who will be introduced shortly by Lesley University's president, Janet Steinmeier. My name is Danielle Legros-George. I am the director of the program, now entering its 18th year, and we are one of the oldest low residency programs in the country, and one that is consistently ranked among the top 10 low residency programs by poets and writers in the nation. This, I would say, because of our excellent faculty, all of whom are practicing award-winning writers and also dedicated and passionate educators, our strong student mentor model of instruction, and our distinctive interdisciplinary studies component. I want to extend a warm welcome to members of the public who are here with us tonight. So welcome to you. I know that there are some prospective students in the audience. Welcome. Note that our next admissions review cycle opens August 15th, and we would be happy to review applications from you. And you can find out more about the program by going to lesley.edu. And of course, it's great to see all the students, the faculty members, and alums in the virtual house. Want to acknowledge, of course, our president, that's the Lesley president, and the Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Social Sciences, Sandra Walker, who is so supportive of the MFA program. Thanks, Sandra, for being here. A few housekeeping items. Be aware that tonight's reading is being recorded, as are all our readings in the series. Jason, Ambassador Reynolds, will be our sole reader tonight, so he'll be reading for 30 to 45 minutes or so. And his reading will be followed by a question and answer session with the audience via the chat, and the chat will be monitored by Chris Clark, our chat meister. So now I would like to invite to the big screen President Janet Steinmeier.
Danielle, thank you so much. I'm just thrilled to be invited back to the MFA in Creative Writing residency and be among all of you who are such talented and devoted writers. It's great to be here. I'm extremely honored to be asked to introduce Jason, and I think this brings a new meaning to needs no introduction, because each of you got on the Zoom tonight and were personally greeted by him. So maybe this can be a little bit more of a celebration, Jason, than an introduction. And I'll just start by talking about how wonderful it is to have you as a member of the Lesley community, and to be motivating and inspiring students here for 5 years in this program. I know that we were delighted to bestow on you an honorary degree in 2018, recognizing you as a Lesley treasure. As I was looking at your writing, and your writing about how you write, one of the things that jumped out at me was your statement that your philosophy is to have a good time getting to know the characters in your stories, which was just a delightful thought. And to never write boring books. And I have to say, you were wildly successful in that. You certainly have reached that goal, and just what a wonderful approach, and what a wonderful thought process to writing for young people. I'm sure you all know that Jason is a New York Times best-selling author of several books, including All-American Boys, the Track series, Long Way Down, and For Everyone. And his book, Ghost, is a National Book Award finalist for young people's literature. In fact, he's the recipient of numerous awards and accolades, including Newbery Award honoree, the NAACP Image Award winner, and the Nerdy Book Club Award winner. I'm dying to learn more about that. Your eloquence, your passion, your conviction have brought you to the national spotlight. but I think your readers, your young readers, trust you because of how genuine you are and how much you speak directly to them. You speak with characters that are like them, you speak in their voices, and you speak about the neighborhoods that they live in. And it's clearly because of this that earlier this year, the Library of Congress acknowledged you as a national treasure as well as a Lesley treasure with the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. And through this, your work to bring students to and young people to read more and to share their stories has been amazing. Your latest book is perhaps the most important yet, and it writes about the history of racism in America, the truths that are so often omitted, the half-truths. You allow us to get angry about it. You show us how to strip racism of its power. It's such an important and timely book, and I'm really honored to introduce you. I have to share with you when the virus first broke out and we closed the campus, I asked people, what is the one thing that we can do that will make everybody's life better? And the thing that everybody came to talk about was exactly what's happening tonight, that you would read a story from your most recent book. So thank you for that. And thank you for being part of the Lesley community. It's an honor to introduce you.
Thank you so much. That was so kind. I always get so I get a little emotional sometimes and a little reticent because we're all just trying to do the best we can. We're all doing our work, trying to advance sort of the space of letters, advance who we are as humans, advance where we are in our society. For me personally, advance or at least be of service to the young people in our world to ensure that they grow up to then really push the line forward. So I really appreciate all of it. And shouts to the whole Lesley community. I'm grateful to be on staff, on faculty there, and to work with so many brilliant writers and to work around so many brilliant writers. Got a lot of love for y'all. And it's weird to do it this way this year, but here we are. So here's the thing. I'm going to read from Stamped. I'm going to read from Stamped. And there are a few reasons why. One, because it's obviously the newest book, but also because I think the complicated part about children's literature is that it encompasses all the things, right? And so like when we talk about it, even in the program sometimes, it's like it gets a little complicated because children's literature can be all the other categories in some way, shape, or form. For instance, right, we have children's writers who write poetry. We have children's writers who obviously write fiction. We have children's writers who do graphic novels. We have children's writers who write stage and screen. And of course, we have children's writers who write nonfiction. And I wanted to make sure this time around that I also got to put on display what it looks like to be a children's writer who also writes nonfiction, which is what this will be. And then the last reason that I'm going to read from Stamped is because we're living in a world where we have to have very straightforward conversations around race. And the reason that we can't have these straightforward conversations is because not all of us are informed. My job is to make sure that our children, first and foremost, are informed so that they can grow up with the lexicon to have this conversation a lot easier. Because if language is the cornerstone of culture, then if we shift language, we might be able to shift culture. So if I give them vocabulary, or if I help them sort of grapple and wrestle with these things semantically, then perhaps we can even shift a bit of the culture on the other end. So with that being said, I'm going to read, I got 30 minutes or so. I'm going to read just the whole first section. For any of you who read this book, it moves kind of quick and it's got a pace to it. I want to say that I am, that the purpose of even taking on this project to begin with was I felt like it was necessary. We haven't seen a textbook that was written like anything that any child would ever want to read. And so my job was to say, what if we could figure out how to make a book that was taught in school that actually felt like it was written with young people in mind? And with that being said, I'm going to read a bit of Stamped, Racism, Antiracism, and You. If you don't know what this book is about, well, I hope you're not afraid to talk about race, because that's what we're about to talk about. If this is going to be a surprise for you, you have no clue of how much of a surprise it's going to be. With that being said, here we go. I don't know why they keep me on faculty here. I have no clue how I keep a job, but here we go. All right. Chapter 1, the story of the world's first racist. Before we begin, let's get something straight. This is not a history book. I repeat, this is not a history book, at least not like the ones you're used to reading in school. The ones that feel more like a list of dates, and there will be some, with an occasional war here and there, a declaration, definitely got to mention that, a constitution, that too, a court case or two, and of course the paragraph that's read during Black History Month, Harriet Rosa Martin. This isn't that. This isn't a history book, or at least it's not that kind of history book. Instead, what this is a book that contains history. A history directly connected to our lives as we live them right this minute. This is a present book, a book about the here and now, a book that hopefully will help us better understand why we are where we are as Americans, specifically as our identity pertains to race. Uh-oh, the R word, which for many of us still feels rated R, or can be matched only with another R word, run. But don't. Let's all just take a deep breath, inhale, hold it, exhale, and breathe out race. See? It's not so bad, except for the fact that race has been a strange and persistent poison in American history, which I'm sure you already know. I'm also sure that depending on where you are and where you've grown up, your experiences with it, or at least the moment in which you recognize it, may vary. Some may believe race isn't an issue anymore, that it's a thing of the past, old tales of bad times. Others may be certain that race is like an alligator, a dinosaur that never went extinct but instead evolved. And though hiding in murky swamp waters, that leftover monster is still deadly. And then there are those of you who know that race, and more critical, racism, are everywhere. Those of you who see racism regularly robbing people of liberty, whether as a violent stick-up or as a sly pickpocket, the thief known as racism is all around. This book, this not history book, this present book is meant to take you on a race journey from then to now, to show why we feel how we feel, why we live how we live, and why this poison, whether recognizable or unrecognizable, whether it's a scream or a whisper, just won't go away. This isn't the be-all, end-all. This isn't the whole meal. It's more like an appetizer, something in preparation for the feast to come, something to get you excited about choosing your seat, the right seat, at the table. Oh, and there are 3 words I want you to keep in mind. 3 words to describe the people we'll be exploring: segregationists, assimilationists, anti-racists. There are serious definitions to these things, but I'm gonna give you mine. Segregationists are haters, like real haters, people who hate you for not being like them. Assimilationists are people who like you, but only with quotation marks, like you, meaning they like you because you're like them. And then there are anti-racists. They love you because you're like you. But it's important to note, life can rarely be wrapped into single word descriptions. It isn't neat and perfectly shaped. So sometimes over the course of a lifetime, and even over the course of a day, people can take on and act out ideas represented by more than one of these 3 identities. Can be both and. Just keep that in mind as we explore these folks. And actually, these aren't just the words we'll be using to describe the people in this book. They're also the words we'll be using to describe you and me, all of us. So where do we start? Well, we might as well jump in and begin with the world's first racist. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how could anyone know who the world's first racist was? Or you're thinking, yeah, tell me where the world's first racist is and tell me where he lived. Well, he's dead. Been dead for 600 years, thankfully. And before I tell you about him, I have to give you a little context. Europe. That's where we are, where he was. As I'm sure you've learned by now, the Europeans, Italians, Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, British, were conquering everyone, because if there's one thing all history books do say, it's that Europeans conquered the majority of the world. The year is 1415, and Prince Henry, there's always a Prince Henry, convinced his father, King John of Portugal, to basically pull a caper and capture the main Muslim trading depot on the northeastern tip of Morocco. Why? Simple. Prince Henry was jealous. The Muslims had riches, and if Prince Henry could get the Muslims out of the way, then those riches and resources could be easily accessed. Stolen, a jack move, a robbery, plain and simple. The take a bountiful supply of gold and Africans. That's right. The Portuguese were capturing Moorish people who had become prisoners of war in a war the Moors hadn't planned on fighting, but had to survive. And by prisoners, I mean property, human property. But neither Prince Henry nor King John of Portugal was given the title the world's first racist, because the truth is, capturing people wasn't an unusual thing back then. Just a fact of life. That illustrious moniker would go to a man named neither Henry nor John, but something way more awesome, who did something not awesome at all, Gomez Illanes de Zurara. Zurara, which sounds like a cheerleader chant, did just that. He cheerled, whatever. He was a cheerleader, kind of. Not the kind who roots for a team and pumps up a crowd, but he was a man who made sure the team he played for was represented and heralded as great. He made sure Prince Henry was looked at as a brilliant quarterback, making ingenious plays, that every touchdown was the mark of a superior player. How did Zurara do this? Through literature, storytelling. See, he wrote the story, a biography of the life and slave trading of Prince Henry. See, Zurara was an obedient commander in Prince Henry's military order of Christ and would eventually complete his book, which would become the first defense of African slave trading. It was called The Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea. In it, Zurara bragged about the Portuguese being early in bringing enslaved Africans from the Western Sahara Cape, and spoke about owning humans as if they were exclusive pairs of sneakers. Again, this was common, but he upped the brag by also explaining what made Portugal different from their European neighbors in terms of slave trading. See, the Portuguese now saw enslaving people as missionary work. A mission from God to help civilize and Christianize the African savages. At least that's what Zurara claimed. And the reason this was a one-up on his competitors, the Spanish and the Italians, was because they were still enslaving Eastern Europeans, as in white people, not called white people back then, by the way. Zurara's ace, his trick shot, was that Portuguese had enslaved Africans of all shades, by the way, supposedly for the purpose of saving their wretched souls. Zurara made Prince Henry out to be some kind of youth minister canvassing the street doing community work, when what Prince Henry really was more of a gangster, more of a shakedown man, a kidnapper getting a commission for bringing the king captives. Prince Henry's cut, like a finder's fee, 185 slaves equaling money, though it was always framed as a noble cause thanks to Zurara, who was also paid for his pen. Seems like Zurara was just a liar, right? A fiction writer. So what makes him the world's first racist? Well, Zurara was the first person to write about and defend Black human ownership, and this single document began the recorded history of anti-Black racist ideas. You know how the kings are always attached to where they rule, like King John of Portugal. Well, if Gomez Illanes de Zurara was the king of anything, which he wasn't, he would have been King Gomez of racism. Zurara's book, The Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea, was a hit, and you know what hits do? They spread. Like a pop song that everyone claims to hate, but everyone knows the words to, and then suddenly no one hates the song anymore, and instead it becomes an anthem. Zurara's book became an anthem, a song sung all across Europe as the primary source of knowledge on unknown Africa and African peoples for the original slave traders and enslavers in Spain, Holland, France, and England. Zurara depicted Africans as savage animals that needed taming. This depiction over time would even begin to convince some African people that they were inferior, like Al-Hassan ibn Muhammad al-Wazan al-Fasi, a well-educated Moroccan who was on a diplomatic journey along the Mediterranean Sea when he was captured and enslaved. He was eventually freed by Pope Leo X, who converted him to Christianity, renamed him Johannes Leo, who later became known as Leo Africanus or Leo the African, and possibly commissioned him to write a survey of Africa. And in that survey, Africanus echoed Zurara's sentiments of Africans, his own people. He said they were hypersexual savages, making him the first known African racist. When I was growing up, we called this drinking the Kool-Aid or selling out. Either way, Zurara's documentation of the racist idea that Africans needed slavery in order to be fed and taught Jesus, and that it was all ordained by God, began to seep in and stick to the European cultural psyche. And a few hundred years later, this idea would eventually reach America. Chapter 2, Puritan power. I hope y'all all right, by the way. I mean, you know, the truth shall set you free. Happy Juneteenth, by the way. Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Hope y'all enjoyed yourself. Hope you celebrated. Chapter 2, Puritan power. Okay, so by now, hopefully you're saying, wow, this really isn't like the history books I'm used to. And if you aren't saying that, well, you're a liar. And guess what? You wouldn't be the first. After Gomez Illanes de Zurara's ridiculous money-grabbing lie, there were European race theorists who followed suit, using his text as a jumping-off point for their own concepts and racist ideas to justify the enslavement of Africans. Because if there's one thing we all know about humans, it's that most of us are followers looking for something to be part of to make us feel better about our own selfishness. I should repeat that line. Because if there's one thing we know about humans, it's that most of us are followers looking for something to be part of to make us feel better about our own selfishness. Or is that just me? Just me? Got it. Anyway, the followers came sniffing around, drumming up their own cockamamie, best word ever, even better than Zurara, though possibly a synonym, theories, two of which would set the table for the conversation around racism for centuries to come. Those theories were, number one, climate theory. This actually came from Aristotle, we'll get back to him later, who questioned whether Africans were born this way or if the heat of the continent made them inferior. Many agreed it was climate and that if African people lived in cooler temperatures, they could in fact become white. And number two, curse theory. In 1577, after noticing that Inuit people in northeastern freezing cold Canada were darker than the people living in the hotter South, English travel writer George Best determined, conveniently for all parties interested in owning slaves, that it couldn't have been climate that made darker people inferior, and instead determined that Africans were in fact cursed. First of all, could you imagine someone on the Travel Channel telling you that you are cursed? Like, seriously. And what did Best use to prove his theory? Only one of the most irrefutable books of the time, the Bible. In Best's whimsical interpretation of the book of Genesis, Noah orders his white sons not to have sex with their wives on the ark, and then tells them that the first child born after the flood would inherit the earth. When the evil, tyrannical, and hypersexual Ham goes ham and has sex on the ark, God wills that Ham's descendants will be dark and disgusting, and the whole world will look at them as symbols of trouble. Simply put, Ham's kids would be black and bad, ultimately making black bad. Curse theory would become the anchor of what would justify American slavery. It would branch off into another ridiculous idea, the strange concept that because Africans were cursed and because, according to these Europeans, they needed enslavement in order to be saved and civilized, the relationship between slave and master was loving, that it was more like parent and child or minister and member, mentor, mentee. They were painting a compassionate picture about what was certainly a terrible experience because, well, human beings were being forced into servitude and there's no way to spin that into one big happy family. But the literature said otherwise. That's right. There was another piece of literature. This was one written by a man named William Perkins called Ordering a Family, published in 1590, in which he argued that the slave was just part of a loving family unit that was ordered a particular way, and that the souls and the potential of the souls were equal, but not the skin. It's like saying, I look at my dog like I look at my children, even though I've trained my dog to fetch my paper by beating it and yanking its leash. But the idea of it all, that the new enslavers off the emotional hook and portrayed them as benevolent do-gooders cleaning up the Africans. A generation later, slavery touched down in the newly colonized America and the people there to usher it in, and more important, to use it to build this new country where two men, each of whom saw himself as a similar kind of do-gooder. Their names, John Cotton and Richard Mather. About Cotton and Mather, they were Puritans. About Puritans, they were English Protestants who believed the Reformation of the Church of England was basically watering down Christianity, and they sought to regulate it to keep it more disciplined and rigid. So these two men at different times traveled across the Atlantic in search of a new land, which would be Boston, by the way, Lesley University, where they could escape English persecution and preach their version, a purer version of Christianity. They landed in America after treacherous trips, especially Richard Mather, whose ship sailed into a storm in 1635 and almost collided with a massive rock in the ocean. Mather, of course, saw his survival of this journey to America as a miracle and became even more devoted to God. Both men were ministers. They built churches in Massachusetts, but more important, they built systems. The church wasn't just a place of worship. The church was a place of power and influence, and in this new land, John Cotton and Richard Mather had a whole lot of power and influence. And the first thing they did to spread the Puritan way was find other people who were like-minded. And with those like-minded folks, they created schools to enforce higher education skewed toward their way of thinking. What school do you think was the first to get the Puritan touch? This is a trick question, because the answer is the very first university in America ever. Remember, this society is all brand new. And the very first university in America ever was Harvard University. But a tricky thing happens with the opening of Harvard, a thing that directly connects to Zurara and the curse and climate theories and everything we've talked about thus far. See, Cotton and Mather were students of Aristotle. And Aristotle, though held up as one of the greatest Greek philosophers of all time, famous for things we will not be discussing here because this is not a history book, believed something else he's not nearly as famous for. And that's his belief in human hierarchy. Aristotle believed that Greeks were superior than non-Greeks. John Cotton and Richard Mather took Aristotle's idea, because they too were followers, and flipped it into a new equation, substituting Puritan for Greek. And because of their miraculous journeys across the raging ocean, especially Richard Mather's, they believed they were a chosen people, special in the eyes of God, Puritan superiority. According to the Puritans, they were better than 1, Native Americans, 2, Anglican English people who weren't Puritans, 3, everyone else who wasn't a Puritan, 4, especially African people. And guess what they did during the development of Harvard? They made it so that Greek and Latin texts could not be disputed, which meant Aristotle, a man who believed in human hierarchy and used climate to justify which humans were better, could not be disputed and instead had to be taken as truth. And just like that, the groundwork was laid, not only for slavery to be justified, but for it to be justified for a long, long time, simply because it was woven into the religious and educational systems of America. All that was needed to complete this oppressive puzzle were slaves. America at this time was like one of those games where you have to build the world, a social network of farmers and planters. And if you weren't a farmer planter, then you were a missionary. So you were either dirt folk or church folk, everyone working to grow on stolen land. Obviously, their native neighbors weren't happy about any of this because their world was being broken while a new world was being built, planted one seed at a time. That seed, tobacco. A man named John Pori, a defender of curse theory, the cousin of one of the early major landowners, was named America's first legislative leader. First thing he did was set the price for tobacco, seeing as it would be the country's cash crop. But if tobacco was really going to bring in some money, if it was really going to be the natural resource used to power the country, then they would need more human resource to grow it. You see where this was going. In August 1619. A Spanish ship called the San Juan Batista was hijacked by 2 pirate ships. The Batista was carrying 350 Angolans because Latin American slave owners had already figured out their own slave trading system and had enslaved 250,000 people. The pirates robbed the Batista, taking 60 of the Angolans. They headed east, eventually coming upon the shores of Jamestown, Virginia. They sold 20 Angolans to that cousin of John Pori, the one with all the land, who happened also to be the governor of Virginia. His name was George Yeardley, and those first 20 slaves for Yeardley and Pori were right on time to work. But remember, America was full of planters and missionaries, and the new slaves would cause a bit of conflict between the two. For the planter, the slave was a big help and could be the 4-digit code to the American ATM. Here comes the cash. On the flip side though, the missionaries, coming down the line of Puritanism and Zurara's propaganda, felt slavery was a means to salvation. Planters wanted to grow profits while missionaries wanted to grow God's kingdom. No one cared what the enslaved African wanted, which to start would have been not to be enslaved. They definitely didn't want the religion of their masters, and their masters resisted too. Enslavers weren't interested in hearing anything about converting their slaves. Saving their crops each year was more important to them than saving souls. It was harvest over humanity, and the excuses they gave to avoid baptizing slaves were: Africans were too barbaric to be converted, Africans were savage at the soul, Africans couldn't be loved even by God. I read one more chapter. I don't want to overdo it. I can't tell. One more chapter. Chapter 3, A Different Adam. As I mentioned before, after Zurara's nonsense documentation about slave trading and the savage nature of Africans, many other Europeans started to write their own testimonies and theories. But it didn't stop with just Aristotle or George Best, the travel writer. A century later, the tradition, one that would go on indefinitely, of writing about the African was alive and well and more creative than ever. And when I say creative, I mean trash. There was a piece in 1664 by the British minister Richard Baxter called A Christian Directory. Notes on Baxter. He believed slavery was helpful for African people. He even said there were voluntary slaves, as in Africans who wanted to be slaves so that they could be baptized. Voluntary slaves? Richard Baxter was clearly out of his mind. There was also work by the great English philosopher John Locke, Notes on Locke, in regard to African people. He believed that the most unblemished, purest, perfect minds belonged to whites, which basically meant Africans had dirty brains. And by the Italian philosopher Lucilio Vanini, Notes on Vanini. He believed Africans were born of a different Adam and had a different creation story. Of course, this would mean they were a different species. It was kind of like saying, or to him proving, that Africans weren't actually human. Like they were maybe animals or monsters or aliens, but not human, at least not like whites, and therefore didn't have to be treated as such. This theory, which is called polygenesis, broke the race conversation wide open. It took Zurara's initial benevolent master mess and put it in a bold, like Africans went from savages to savages, which revved up the necessity for Christian conversion and civilizing. Pause. I know we've been going on and on about the people working to justify slavery, but it's important, very important, to note that there were also people all along the way who stood up and fought against these ridiculously racist ideas with abolitionist ideas. In this particular case, the case of Vanini's theory of polygenesis, a group of Mennonites in Germantown, Pennsylvania rose up. The Mennonites were a Christian denomination from a German and Dutch-speaking areas of Central Europe. During the 16th and early 17th centuries, Orthodox authorities were killing them for their religious beliefs. Mennonites didn't want to leave behind one place of oppression to build another in America, so they circulated an anti-slavery petition on April 18, 1688, denouncing oppression due to skin color by equating it with oppression due to religion. Both oppressions were wrong. This petition, the 1688 Germantown Petition Against Slavery, was the first piece of writing that was anti-racist among European settlers in colonial America. But whenever people rise up against bad things, bad things tend to get worse. You know the old saying, when the going gets tough, the tough gets racist, or something like that. So all that anti-racist talk coming from the Mennonites was shut down because slaveholders didn't like their businesses talked about like it was wrong, because they needed their slaves, because their slaves made them money. It's really all quite simple. Now, there's an obvious backdrop we need to discuss. The subject of our first grade color in the lines cornucopia worksheets that misinterpreted, misrepresented owners of this terrain, the Native Americans. All this is happening on their land. A land that was taken from them forcefully, claimed and owned by Europeans running from their homelands, afraid for their lives. It's kind of like the kid who gets beat up every day at school, comes home crying to his mother, and she decides to take him to a new school. And guess what he does when he gets to the new school? He pretends like he wasn't just on the receiving end of a boot sole, and instead becomes the most annoying and tough guy in the world. And the Native Americans were sick of the tough acting, arrogant new kid. So, fight. The Native American and the new white American beef had been brewing for over a year, but let's be honest, it had to have been brewing much longer than that. And when I say brewing, I mean people were dying, bloodshed in the soil. The Puritans in New England had already lost homes and dozens of soldiers, but eventually a man named Metacomet, a Native American war leader, was killed, which basically ended the battle in 1676. Puritans cut up his body like savages, as if it were a hog's, and paraded his remains around Plymouth. But Metacomet's tribe weren't the only indigenous people, obviously, or the only ones being attacked. Down in Virginia, a 29-year-old frontier planter, Nathaniel Bacon, wait, let's just take one time out real quick and acknowledge the irony in the fact that there was a planter whose last name was Bacon. Bacon. Maybe he should have been a butcher. Anyway, Bacon was upset not about the race issue, but instead about the class issue. Here he was, a white laborer who was also being taken advantage of by the white elite. So what he did to disrupt the powers that be was shift his anger from the rich whites to the Susquehannocks, a tribe of natives. This may seem like a strange move, but it was a smart play because the governor at the time, William Berkeley, was doing anything he could not to fight with the natives because it would mess up his fur trade and thus mess up his money. So attacking the natives was a way of attacking the power structure, but through the back door. As we say now, hit them in their pockets where it really hurts. And to make matters worse, Bacon declared liberty for all servants and blacks because as far as he was concerned, though they were different races, they were the same class and should be united against the true enemy, rich whites. But the governor knew if blacks and whites joined forces, he'd be done. Everything would be done. It would have been an apocalypse. So he had to devise a way to turn poor whites and poor blacks against each other so that they'd be forever separated and unwilling to join hands and raise fists against the elite. And the way he did this was by creating, wait for it, white privileges. Time for a breath break. Everyone inhale, hold it, exhale and breathe out. Privilege. You still here? Good. Let's move on. So, white privileges were created, and at this time, they included, number one, only the white rebels were pardoned. Legislators prescribed 30 lashes for any slave who lifted a hand against any Christian. Christian now meant white. Number two, all whites now wielded absolute power to abuse any African person. Those are the two most important ones. Poor whites wouldn't be punished, but they could surely do the punishing. I should stop there. I mean, there's another. That's the end of chapter 3. Then I don't know the time, Danielle, so I don't want to overstay.
Well, you can read for maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, and then we'll.
This is the last chapter of the section, so I'll just finish the section. It's like a few pages.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Chapter 4. A racist wonderkind. Remember John Cotton and Richard Mather, the Puritans who got the American race ball rolling? Well, turns out they had a grandson. Well, not the two of them together, obviously, but Richard Mather's wife dies, and then John Cotton dies, and then Richard Mather marries John Cotton's widow, Sarah, and then Richard Mather's youngest son, whose name is Increase, marries Sarah's daughter, Maria, making her his wife and stepsister. That's by the way, that's true. It's a lot, so let me read it again, because it's wild to think about that, right? Here we go. Richard Mather's wife dies. Then John Cotton dies. Richard Mather marries John Cotton's widow, Sarah. So he married his man's wife. Richard Mather's youngest son, whose name is Increase, marries Sarah's daughter, Maria, making her his wife and stepsister. Increase and Maria have a son on February 12, 1663. They name him after both families. Cotton and Mather becomes Cotton Mather. By the time Cotton Mather heard about Bacon's rebellion, he was already in college. An 11-year-old Harvard student, the youngest of all time, he was obviously a nerd, and on top of all of that, he was extremely religious. He knew he was special, or at least meant to be, which of course did nothing but fill his fellow classmates with spite. They wanted desperately to break him down, make him sin, because no one likes a show-off. Basically, Cotton Mather was obsessed with being perfect and blamed himself for everything wrong or different with him, believing even his stutter, with which he struggled, was due to something sinful he had done. Because he was so insecure about his speech impediment, Cotton Mather took to writing, and eventually he would write more sermons than any other Puritan in history. By the time he graduated from Harvard, he'd overcome his stutter, which to him was, of course, a deliverance from God. Being delivered from his stutter was a good thing, because he was destined for the pulpit. The grandson of two Puritan preachers had to grow up to be one. No other choice. And there was no better way to begin his career as a clergyman than for him to co-pastor his father's, who's also a preacher, church. But while he was avoiding his bullies at Harvard, trying to use his words and doing anything he could to walk a righteous path in the eyes of God, there was a tension brewing between New England and Old England. In 1676, an English colonial administrator, Edward Randolph, had journeyed to New England to see the damage done by Metacomet, the indigenous war hero, and his warriors. Randolph reported this back to King Charles II and suggested they tighten the grip around New England because clearly the New World experiment wasn't going so well. So now Big Brother was threatening to step in and clean up Little Brother's mess, which meant Massachusetts would lose local rule if it didn't defy the king. Of course, the other option was for the colonialists to just fall in line, but that would mean giving up everything they'd worked to build. Defiance seemed like a stronger play, and in 1689, New Englanders did just that. The thing about revolution is that it almost always has to do with poor people angry and being manipulated by the rich. So Cotton Mather, though a recent graduate of Harvard and a God-fearing, sermonizing, well-read man, had a problem on his hands because he was rich. He'd come from an elite family, gotten an elite education, and lived an elite, though pious life, far from the planters and even farther from the slaves. So the revolution of 1688, which was called the Glorious Revolution, was not so glorious for him. And fearing that the anger that caused the uprising would go from the British elites to the elites right at home, meaning him, he created a new villain as a distraction, an invisible demon. Cue the scary music. Mather wrote a book called Memorable Providences Relating to Witchcrafts and Possessions. That's right, Cotton Mather, the genius boy, destined for intellectual and spiritual greatness, was obsessed with witches. And this obsession would set a fire he couldn't have seen coming, but welcomed as the will of God. Mather's book outlining the symptoms of witchcraft reflected his crusade against the enemies of white souls. His father was just as obsessed, but no one poured gasoline on the witchy fire like a minister in Salem, Massachusetts named Samuel Parris. In 1692, when Parris's 9-year-old daughter suffered convulsions and chokes, he believed she'd been possessed or cursed by a witch, and that was all it took. The witch hunt began. Over the next few months, as bewitching instances continued to happen, people continued to be accused of witchcraft, which luckily for the folks like Cotton Mather turned attention away from the political and onto the religious. And in nearly every instance, the devil, who was preying upon innocent white Puritans, was described as Black, of course. One Puritan accuser described the devil as a little black bearded man. Another saw a black thing of a considerable bigness. A black thing jumped in one man's window. The body was like that of a monkey, the observer added. The feet like a cock's, but the face much like a man's. Since the devil represented criminality, and since criminals in New England were said to be the devil's minions, the Salem witch hunt made the black face the face of criminality. And it was like racist algebra. Solve for X, solve for white, solve for anything other than truth. Once the witch hunt eventually died down, the Massachusetts authorities apologized to the accused, reversed the convictions of the trials, and provided reparations in the early 1700s. But Cotton Mather never stopped defending the Salem witch trials because he never stopped defending the religious, slaveholding, gender, class, and racial hierarchies reinforced by the trials. He saw himself as a defender of God's law and the crucifier of any non-Puritan, African, Native American, poor person, or woman who defied God's law by not submitting to it. And just as it went with the theorists who came before him, the racist children of Zu-Ra-Ra, Cotton Mather's ideas and writings spread from Massachusetts throughout the land. This was just as two other things were happening. Boston was becoming the intellectual capital of the new America, and tobacco was taking off, booming, which meant more slaves were needed in order to manage it. As the population of enslaved people grew, which is what slaveholders needed in order to till the land and grow the tobacco for free, the fear of more revolt grew with it. Seems like a natural fear in response to such an unnatural system. So in order to keep their human property from rising up, slaveholders and politicians created a new unnatural system, a new set of racist codes. Number one, no interracial relationships. Number two, tax imported captives. Number three, classify natives and blacks the same way you would horses and hogs in the tax code, meaning they were literally classified as livestock and not as human. Number four, blacks can't hold office. Number five, all property owned by a slave is sold, which of course contributes to black poverty. Number six, and white indentured servants who were freed are awarded 50 acres of property, of course, contributing to white prosperity. And while all this was going on, all this systemic knife turning, all this racist political play, all the violence and discrimination, Cotton Mather, all high and mighty, was still trying to convince people that the only thing necessary, the only mission of slavery had to be to save the souls of the slaves, because through that salvation, the enslaved would in turn be whitened, purified. Enslavers became more open to these ideas over time, right up until the First Great Awakening, which swept through the colonies in the 1730s, spearheaded by a Connecticut man named Jonathan Edwards. Edwards, whose father had studied under Increase Mather, was a direct descendant of the Mather's Puritan thought. He spoke about human equality and soul, and the capability of everyone for conversion. And as this racist Christian awakening continued to evolve, as people like Edwards carried on the torch of torture, Cotton Mather continued to age. In 1728, on his 65th birthday, he called his church's pastor into the room for prayer. The next day, Cotton Mather, one of New England's greatest God-fearing scholars, was dead. But you know how death is. Your body goes, but your ideas don't. Your impact lingers on even when it's poisonous. Some bodies get put into the ground and daisies bloom. Others encourage the sprouting of weeds that work to strangle whatever's living and growing around us. All right. It is what it is.
Whoa, whoa. What a veritable juggernaut of historiography.
Thank you.
So meta and wonderful. Where to begin, really? So much insight and science dropped. Extraordinary metaphors that you create, including slaves are the 4-digit code of the American ATM. I love what you do with mixing the ideas of the current day as you're as you're relaying and analyzing historical events. I mean, I just think it's just amazing. And of course, your mordant wit as you're revealing all of this to us. So thank you, Jason. This is, I mean, the reading has been just, you know, extraordinary. I know that that folks are going to have questions for you. And so we're going to take questions from the chat. And I don't know if anybody has had time to formulate a question for Jason, but let's see. Chris, do we have anything in the chat?
We do. The first question comes from Michelle Vital, who says, "Thank you, Jason. How do young people respond to such heavy topics?"
You know, it's interesting. I think it's a question that comes up a lot. I think that for me, in my experience over the years, because I mean, I've written about heavy stuff a lot. I mean, All American Boys was about police brutality 5 years ago. You know, Long Way Down is about gun violence. I mean, I talk about, I mean, I got books about parents who tried to shoot their children. I mean, all kind of stuff, right? And what I find is that young people can handle it. It's adults who have a problem. You know, like the kids are ready. The kids are sort of like, the kids are confused why it's been kept from them. I think what happened with this book when it came out was that all these young people were reaching out to me upset because they felt like they'd been lied to. They felt like their teachers were lying, their parents were lying. They felt like the education, they felt like, why is this not in the history books? Why, you know, like it wasn't sort of, I don't understand. It was more so, I don't understand why you kept this from me, or I don't understand why I don't already know this, or I don't understand why we're not talking about these things. But in terms of the actual subject matter, young people, especially if given to them, if facilitated, which is what's necessary, young people can handle whatever we put in front of them. I think the issue is that we often put things in front of them and then we're not there to help facilitate the discussion, to help them sort of synthesize and process the information. And so in my experience, it's been a wonderful thing. And honestly, I think it's the insecurity of adults will always get in the way of our kids' growth. And I think sometimes we have to prepare our children and not always protect them. Not to mention that it's in the preparation of a child that he or she is protected. You know what I mean? So it's been great. Shout out to the kids. I got more faith in them than anybody else.
We have a question from Francis who says, what age kids did you have in mind when you were writing Stamped?
So it's technically, they have it at 12 and up. So 12 is what, 7th grade, right? I think. And so I would say that's about right. I mean, if you got a strong teacher or a strong parent and y'all are able to have the discussions, I think 6th grade is good. I mean, All American Boys was being read in the 6th grade. And there's some stuff in that book that's pretty rough, you know? So I think, look, you know your kids, you know what I mean? Like I can't, the categories are for marketing purposes, right? The categories don't actually exist. It's a thing that are used to sort of figure out where to market books certain ways. But the truth of the matter is that if you're 40, this is your book, right? And if you're 14, then this is your book. The real question is, are we willing to have conversations around the subject matter so that we can better understand what exactly we're grappling with in the text? If we're not willing to do that, it don't matter what age you are, it ain't for you, right? You know what I mean? And so that's just sort of how I feel about it. So if you know that you got a child who's willing who can handle it and who's sort of in a space where they're ready to take on this conversation, I refuse to put an age on any of my work, you know?
So we have a question, I want to say from a young person in the audience, but I'm not 100% sure. It's from Akila's son, Dominic. I don't know if he's young for sure, but I'm guessing. Okay, all right. So Dominic says, what made you decide to write this book?
Dominic, my man, what's up, bro? I like your new haircut, Dominic. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you was right. You was with me for a minute, then you was like, I can't do it no more. You cut. I get it. I understand, brother. It gets rough out here. Summertime, it's hot. I get it. What made me write the book? So the truth is that this is a translation of another book that is on my shelf somewhere. That is a massive book. And so basically what happened was the brother that wrote the original version of this book, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, who is one of America's greatest race scholars at the moment, he called me and was like, bro, this book is 700 pages and I need to figure out I need you to basically rewrite this book for kids. And I was like, you bugging out, you know, I barely got through school, champ. Like I wasn't a good student. I wasn't a good scholar. It's a wonder that I even teach. Every day I'm like, wow, this is really something. Life is a trip because I wasn't that great of a student. I wouldn't call myself scholarly when I was younger. I struggled with studying. I didn't understand how to research. But this man entrusted me with all of his research. And he said, look, I got all this research I've done. I just need you to translate this thing. I need you to rewrite everything and make it palatable and interesting and fun for a 12-year-old. And after I said no 3 times. And after a while, I said yes, because I realized that we have obligations. Look, I believe in the role of a writer, right? That we have a role, right? Me, at least, especially the legacy and tradition of Black art has always been, there's been an argument about, do Black artists get to make art for art's sake? And that argument still exists. I personally don't know if we have the luxury for that right now. And so I chose to do something that even I did not want to do and that I thought was outside of my depth. But I thought it was bigger than me. And so I chose to do it. And I think, Dominic, for you as you get older, brother, this is what I talk about all the time. In my Lesley MFA, my Lesley graduation speech that I gave when I was fortunately given the honorary degree, I talk about waking up every single day and making decisions to do the right thing, even if it puts me at risk, even if it gets in the way of my life, even if it is inconvenient. And that's what this was. And now, I'm grateful that it exists in the world, and I really hope it changes the academic space as far as the way we read history and also the way we even think about textbooks. That's what I really want. Change the whole paradigm about how we think about textbooks. And if that happens, man, then I'm glad I ran toward the fear.
All right. I'm going to risk mispronouncing a name here. I want to say Chic Love. It could be Chic. Writes, Jason, how was it for you emotionally to do this research?
Complicated. It was a complicated situation. One, I felt like the kids feel when they talk to me about it, which is like, why haven't I been told this? Why haven't I known this? I mean, it goes into like movies that we've all watched and loved and the history behind those movies and why they were made in the first place, like Rocky. Or Planet of the Apes, right? Like why those films were like they were direct results and they were commentary about the world that we were living in. That was complicated because I grew up loving Rocky, right? And I was like, what you mean? What you mean this came from some strange racist place that I didn't even know existed? I think about simple things, right? Prime example is I struggled with Brown versus Board of Education. My whole life, I was told that Brown versus Board of Education was one of the most important civil rights bills to ever be passed. And I think it was. I think that there's some truth there. But it's never talked about as something that was also extraordinarily racist. And people say, well, how could it have been racist? Well, because the whole point of the Brown versus Board of Education bill was that Black people deserve that schools should be desegregated. And so Black people should be bused to white schools so that they can get the same education as if the white education was what a good education was. There was never a conversation about white kids being bused to Black schools to get some of this juice we got over here, right? That was never the situation. It was always, if you want a better life, go there and get what they have. And that in and of itself is racist. The bill itself is racist. And the one person who stood up for that and who fought against it happened to be a writer, the great Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston was the one who said, are you insane, right? You can't see that this is a racist bill. As a matter of fact, when you read this book, you'll see that Black women over the course of history has sort of been on the right side every single time of anti-racism, saying something is wrong, something every time, even Black men saying, we should go this way, this is gonna work. And Black women are like, no, there's something wrong about this, And so I think emotionally, there was part of it that I felt really, I felt robbed. I felt sort of lost and in the dark at certain points. I thought I knew who I was to the core. And then I realized that there were parts of me that were still playing against, like still bumping up against the proximity of whiteness, because that's the way I was raised in order to survive in the country. It's like, when do I get to know who I really am? Because in order to know who I really am, I literally have to push away all the things that were given to me to protect me in the American racist society, right? Like, it's a complicated sort of thing. And so, it was meditative at times, but ultimately I feel better. I feel emboldened. I feel strengthened because now it can be less emotional, right? And more informed, right? We operate on feelings. And it's like, yeah, but when somebody say, how can you prove racism? Then we stuck out there because racism as in and of itself is an abstraction. But now we got history. Now we got information. And so we need not be so emotional. And I can actually fight that battle with a real weapon. So.
Excellent. So our next question is from AJ Verdell. She says, hello, Jason. Thank you for your energy. And asks, can you define for us what the word stamped refers to?
Oh, yeah. It refers to a few things. I mean, one, it refers to, it refers to a few things. Oh, it's interesting. So one, it refers to the idea that Africans were socially and philosophically branded as inferior from the very beginning, right? From the very beginning. And then it also means that Africans and African people and the people of African descent were physically branded and physically stamped as well. And then thirdly, this is like a triple entendre. And thirdly, stamped, right? The word stamped also it's also sort of a play on what we all know as the word stomp as well, right? So to be stamped, to be tamped down, right? So it's all those things in one. It's about philosophical stamping of something, right? Washing something as one way from the very beginning, saying that you will never ever be able to be anything more than a savage because you are a savage, even though we were never savages, right? But the branding of that was already there. We were branded as a thing, like any other business. Like any other business, like saying you got the best beef in the land. It's no different, right? It's a branding. It was a branding. And then the other thing was it was a physical branding, right? All of us being physically branded as property. And then also sort of the stamping down, the squashing of a culture, or at least the attempt to squash a culture, to squash the humanity of a people, to strip them of liberty and their right to life under the guise of inferiority and capitalism. Thanks, AJ. Love you.
So Lee asks, Jason, if you plan on continuing this line of nonfiction, maybe another text with Ibram Kendi with regard to his book on how to be an anti-racist.
You know what? I don't want to. I don't feel like it. I tell you that much. I think, I got into this I'm a storyteller, man. And this is storytelling. So all my nonfiction homies, I know y'all know this is storytelling. Don't get me wrong. This is a whole different kind of storytelling. It wasn't fun. Like, I'm so glad it exists, but it just was not a good time for me. Like it took a while. It took a long time. I wrote several drafts, one of which was 500 pages. I didn't enjoy the process. I definitely am so proud of it, and I love what it became and what we were able to make, what I was able to write and what we were able to publish. But I hope not, man. I mean, and the wild part is I say that, but if he asked me, I'd probably be like, all right, bro, all right, we can just do one more. Like, you know what I mean? Actually, to be honest with you, I do have an opportunity right now. I can't really say much about it, but there is some, like, to write a biography of somebody really incredible. We'll see. I'm thinking about it. We'll see. If I do it, I'm gonna be calling all my nonfiction buddies and colleagues in this Lesley faculty and be like, look, I have no idea what to do or how to do this, but I have an opportunity of a lifetime. So we'll see how it goes. So maybe.
So the next two are kind of the same question, and it's about companion texts or follow-ups for people who want to continue the conversation and understanding, especially young people. So this comes from Rob Dunleavy and Nicole.
Okay. I'm glad he said for young people, because if he said not for young people, I was definitely going to be like, bro, I ain't got time to give you no reading list, champ. Like we've been doing this I've been doing this for the last 3 weeks, bro. Like I can't, I'm reading list out, man. You got to just Google it. I can't, I'm out. I'm tapped out. But because you said young people, I'm gonna look out for you because I love the babies. I love you too, but I'm all out. You know what I mean? All right. So for the kids, I would say, look, the best thing about this is that we have a few different versions of books that have been adapted, right? So we have Just Mercy, the children's version, the young people's version of Just Mercy. The young people's version of Trevor Noah's book is brilliant. Born a Crime, a wonderful, wonderful book. So check that out. But also, depending upon how young we're talking, you could just get any of these books. Get Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, and just walk them through it. You know what I mean? Really work it out. Right, you do the translation work. Get that, check that out. Get Tiffany M. Jules, How to Be. No, this is an anti-racist book, is what it's called. Check that out, super dope. And it's more of a how-to, right, for kids. Like, here are the things that one needs to be or to work toward anti-racism. Really brilliant. This is an anti-racist book by Tiffany M. Jewell. Check that out. Also, don't just read nonfiction. If you really want to learn or figure out how to gain some empathy or figure out, what your role is in the conversation around race in America, read about Black lives, the banality of Black lives, right? My life is boring as everybody else's. And the moment you read it, you be like, oh, it's just like you. Ain't nothing happening except for the fact that I'm living in a particular skin that makes things a little more dicey when I step out of my home. But inside of my home, I'm cooking dinner like you cooking dinner. And I think we need to read more stories just about Black people. Read Black women. You know why? You know why you should read Black women? And why I always say this is because Black women have a very particular and peculiar experience and existence in this country, because their identities are splintered in so many ways, because they are Black and they are women. And they are American, and if they are Caribbean, they are Caribbean American. They are Black African Caribbean Americans, and if they are continental Africans, they are They are continental African American women, right? If they are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, it's a different identity, and there's no other group of people, I think, who has the experiences. The multitude of experiences that Black women have and write about. And so I would say, make sure you check out Black women fiction writers as well. I think that's a good sort of list. I'm resentful that you asked about it. No, I'm kidding. Who you got, Chris?
All right. I'm gonna skip around just a little bit here. I think we got time for the rest of these, but I think this is a good follow-up. Garrett writes, Jason, I thank you so much for this reading. Amazing. And I love the anecdote about Dr. Kendi. My question, as a writer, how do you navigate making a complicated, traumatizing historical narrative and make it accessible to younger people without being reductive? As someone who hasn't written for younger audiences, this is Garrett, this seems to be such a challenge, which you execute so well.
That is a really good question. How do you do it and not be reductive? The first thing I think is that you got to check your heart. And I know artists, I know authors and stuff, we don't really talk about it this way, but I will say, when you're working for kids, you got to check your heart. What does that mean? That means that the reason that we sort of make reductive work is because we reduce children. So it's not that we're trying to reduce the work, it's that we're trying to reduce the work because we see children as reduced. Right? So if your literature is unsophisticated, it's because you deem young people as unsophisticated, right? And that they won't be able to wrestle with what you've made. So the first thing that has to happen is you got to check yourself. Make sure you know exactly who you're writing for and that you respect that audience. And that you love that, really, and this is something that it feels so hokey, but it's actually it's the thing, right? I know them and I respect them and I love them. Therefore, I need not pander to them. I need not condescend, right? If anything, I just got to figure out how to say the thing as honest as I can, and then create leverage to sort of create analogy to sort of connect things, and then create some levity, because all of us love to laugh. And that's not a children's thing, that's a human thing. My mama say, don't never trust nobody who only cry. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, we got to all of us have a little laughter in our lives, even in the midst of the traumatizing things. And so when I'm writing something like Stamp, something that is so traumatizing, it's the reason why it's full of all these jokes. And because the truth is that racism is so absurd, it is impossible to write about it without writing jokes, if we were being honest about it. But we never are being honest about it, because we put the weight that it deserves the weight, right? So we sort of layer it down with all this weight. And so we talk about it a certain way. But if we were being honest about it, racism at its core is wildly absurd. Wow, I mean, Aristotle literally said, hey, if the African people wasn't living in a hot place, they'd be white. What? You mean to tell me y'all don't find that to be ridiculous, right? That's just so, it's so silly. And yes, it's caused harm on the back end of it, but I think it's important that when shaping stories like this, you figure out how to find a balance between telling the truth and then telling the truth. And what the truth is that this is terrible and this is silly. Both of those things are true. And I have to represent both of those things all the time to help young people sort of grapple with what's in front of them, to help all of us grapple with it, by the way, all of us. You know what I mean? I was the kind of kid who I lost a lot of people early in life, went to a whole bunch of funerals by the time I was 21. And when you go to Black funerals, and I only speak of Black funerals because I'm the only ones I've been to, when you go to Black funerals, they serious, they sad, and then they get ridiculous. And they hilarious, and they funny, and we figure out ways to cope because all of it is just ridiculous when you really think about it, and simultaneously really traumatizing. Both things can be true.
Let's see, we'll go to this question from Latoya Watts. She says, I am a Lesley alumni and educator in Providence, Rhode Island. I read Long Way Down with my students all the time. I am a fan of your work. My job is planning to read Stamped with staff and students in the fall. What recommendations can you give for starting and engaging with this book for white colleagues who struggle with talking about race?
Go and get the educational guide for the book. Sonia Cherry Paul, who is a brilliant academic, brilliant scholar, wrote the best educational guide I've ever seen for any book I've ever done. That's for sure. Sonia Cherry Paul. So I could give you a bunch of, you know, I could throw out a whole bunch of ideas I have, but the truth is nothing is going to be as good as as looking up Sonia Cherry Paul's educational guide and not using it just for young people, but using it for your faculty and teachers as well. Try that out. It's brilliant.
Chris, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Okay, and I have one or two more. So we'll go with this one from Angelo D'Amato. There's a question sort of towards the end of this, but I think it makes sense to read the whole thing. Going off this subject of education, hi Jason, I spent the last year working as a librarian in a K-8 Catholic school. The majority of the students were Latino with a handful of Black kids and maybe one or two white kids. And the staff was almost entirely white. The people responsible for disciplining those kids were almost entirely white. And the students knew that something was off, even if they didn't know what was off. I'm imagining that other schools have a similar problem. How can educators teach their kids, some of whom might be as young as 4, to identify and articulate these systemic issues, and then to harness their feelings and voices? Is it appropriate for specifically white educators to try to do such a thing when the students might see them as part of the problem?
Well, it's tricky, right? So first I would say this, I'm very careful about giving out any sort of consultation around teachers because I'm not a teacher, at least not in that way. I used to, but I'm careful because I don't know where you are in the context of your school, and I just can't be disrespectful or be cavalier about that because I don't want to tell you something and then have you go put your neck in the guillotine. What I will say though is, if your staff is, I will challenge this. If your staff is all white, I just don't understand. I hope that y'all are saying, hey, the staff is really white here, and maybe we should figure out how to make it a little less white, right? Like maybe we should, like, I think, look, at the end of the day, people love to talk about all the ways that they want the world to be a better place without having to actually implement any of the work it takes to get there, right? And so we have to make sure that we're all being honest about the work that we're doing, because some of this work is going to be work that we're using to absolve ourselves of shame and guilt, but not work we're doing to actually change our environments. And so anti-racism, and if you want to work toward anti-racism, it's about action. It's about bringing anti-racism into all the spaces that you exist, which means it very well may be about walking into your place of employment and raising the issue that is anyone else bothered by the fact that we have a school full of brown and Black kids and a staff that's all white, right? Like just like, let's start there. Let's start trying to figure out how to shift the landscape from the archetype from up here, and then it'll trickle down, because it's really difficult. No matter what I say to you, those kids are still those kids, and their experience are still their experiences and not yours. And I think it's going to get complicated even as you decide to sort of figure out better ways to do it. Now, I applaud you or I appreciate you rather, because I don't applaud nobody for trying to be a good person. I appreciate you for being concerned about it all. But so I think that when you start with, you talk to the people up here like, yo, we need to figure out ways to sort of diversify and include some other folks in this faculty. Number two, we need to figure out, if we're not going to have an inclusive faculty, we need to figure out how to have an inclusive extracurricular faculty, right? There needs to be book clubs. There needs to be something outside of school that these young people can go to, who they can trust if they can't trust us. Or you got to be a better ally, and in your allyship, it needs to be more listening than talking. You can't fix these kids. It's not about fixing people. It's not about saving them, right? It's about seeing them, right? So sometimes you got to be the person that says, look, go ahead and let me know. I might not be able to fix it, but I can at least be a sounding board, and I'm not going to judge you for whatever you're getting ready to say. But a lot of these young kids don't trust nobody, and they have every right not to trust you, and that's the truth. That's the truth, right? And so I think you work to earn that trust. You be not as non-judgmental as possible. Discipline is a far away option, right? A far away option. I always say, crawl toward judgment, sprint toward understanding, right? You move very slowly toward judgment and you sprint toward understanding. You don't run and tell the principal, unless it's something that's going to endanger this child. But you got to create a safe space where kids can say the things they want to say, even if it makes you uncomfortable. And if you ain't ready for that kind of work, then this is going to be a complicated situation. But I challenge you to shake it up from the top level, especially if it's a Catholic school. If it's a Catholic school, use Jesus. Like, it's a Catholic school. Use Jesus. I'm not being flippant. I hope you don't take this as flippant. I'm being serious. Like, Jesus is the way to go. What's your last question, brother?
I don't know. That might be a great place to Danielle, do we have time for one more, or?
One more.
Oh, okay, one more.
Let's do the last one. It's the last one. It's all good.
One more. Okay. So let's see. This is from Sharon Bryan.
Sharon.
I just read a quotation from someone about white people being the only race not being discriminated against anywhere. This partially answered my question. I think the reading, partially answered my question about where racism started, but it's still a mystery that whites are at the top of the hierarchy everywhere. Do you have a sense of that? Is it that whites were the first to consolidate power?
I think, yes. I mean, I also think, look, Europe, we really have to acknowledge the fact that what Europe was able to do in terms of world domination was unprecedented and has never happened since. I mean, they really, I mean, the European countries, all of them, right, literally were able, I mean, what the Dutch did in Africa, what the French did in West Africa, what the Dutch did in South Africa, what the Italians attempted to do in East Africa, it didn't work out so well, but they tried, right? What the French did in the Caribbean, what the Brits did in the Caribbean. I mean, we could look all over the world. I mean, Australia, what the Brits did in Australia, right? We can really look at the world. And I think it starts with the fact that the European continent as a whole just dominated so much of the world. Like, that is it. But in order to dominate a thing, right, once you get there and you take over land, you conquer land, you then have to figure out how you're going to survive on this land. But this is land far away from the land you know. So let's say you pick a land like America, the southern part of America, Virginia, right? Let's say you come to Virginia and it's like, yo, it's hot here. Or let's say you go to Louisiana, for instance. They got bogs and swamps. We come from Europe. I'm coming from Europe. I have no idea what a swamp is. I've never seen a swamp. I've never even felt heat this hot. I have no idea how we are going to grow anything on this land because I do not have the skill set to do so because it's not my environment. I got to find the people who have the skill set to do it, but I got to make sure it's free labor. So how do I get free labor so that they can build my new business venture, which is what it always was, and it still is. I got to build my new business venture, but I don't have the capacity to do it. So I have to find free labor. But how can I find free labor and not be seen as a bad person? I couch my free labor in the salvation of the people that I've taken and used to build my land. It's literally the entire, and it's over and over and over and over again. It was actually never about the domination of humans. It was about turning humans into human factories, right? How can I turn human beings into machines? It wasn't because they hated Black people. That's not what it was. It was that we can figure out how to use Black people as commerce to build our country and make us rich. But in order for us to stay this way, we have to make sure that we put systems in place that never allow them the freedoms to actually get above the line. Because once they get above the line, they have the resources to do whatever they want, which is the reason we got them in the first place, because they have the resources to do whatever they want. So we got to convince them they're inferior. We got to give them new religion. We got to give them new language. We got to get them to hate themselves. We got to convince them that dark skin is bad, that kinky hair is bad. We got to figure out how to change the educational system. We got to create media around them, reinforcing these ideas for hundreds and hundreds of years. And when we pass the laws, we got to make new laws and amendments. We're going to pass the 13th Amendment, but we're going to add a clause in the amendment that says if you get convicted of a crime, then you technically can still be a slave. And then after that, we're going to figure out how to stop them from voting. And once we stop them from voting, it stops them from getting political power. And if they can't get political power, we can continue to tamp them down. We'll have them fight in our war because we need their manpower. But when they fight in the war, we'll promise them things that they'll never get. And when they get out of the war, the white men will get GI bills. They'll be able to buy property. Black men won't be able to buy property. Generational wealth begins. Generational poverty begins. I mean, this is literally something. It's a master plan, all started from the wildest hoax ever played on humanity. And that is the truth. A master plan by a few rich people created the wildest hoax that everyone has bought into. Toni Morrison said it best: racism distracts us from our work. And that's what it's been doing for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. We got to reckon with it at some point. We got to reckon with it. And I think this book is that I ain't worried about the adults. You know, a lot of us are far gone. You know what I mean? Because sometimes in order to deal with these things, you know, love, everybody's like, I love Black people. I want to be anti-racist. I want to lead with love. Well, love is risk. Love is sacrifice. And a lot of us ain't ready for that sacrifice. So I'm going to go ahead and deal with these kids, right? This is for the babies so that they can grow up and be better than us. I appreciate y'all for coming. I hope y'all had a good time. I wish we were all at the university.
Yes. Come to the Lesley MFA program.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason, so much for your extraordinary work as a writer, as a thinker, work that encourages us to think about history in the context of anti-racist work, the anti-racist work that we all need to do. Thanks to you for the beautiful exchange that we've had. Audience, thank you for your questions. Thanks for being with us. And get a hold of Stamped and read it as part of your work, Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Jason Reynolds. And I want to encourage everyone to join us on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. for the first of 3 readings by the MFA graduating students. These are always wonderful readings. Our readers on Wednesday will be William Major, Annalee Newton, Mike Penna, and Benjamin Simani. And also want to remind the MFA community that there's an event tomorrow night, the Alumni Pajama Party, an all-genre invitational. So we're going to see the MFA folks, students, and faculty at that session. So thank you, everybody, and and thank you, Chris, for monitoring the chat, and have a great evening.